This is Drew. Welcome, everybody. This is another one where this time we're going to talk about timber counties and the division of resources resulting from that. And quickly, a timber county is a county that has a large degree of timberland and does controlled cuts to partially fund its government. And before we get into that, I want to acknowledge something and explain something shortly to folks. This channel can probably seem like it's all over the place a little bit. We've talked about homelessness, we've talked about mental health, we've talked about running for an office, an elected office. And the reason we cover so much ground is because if you get involved in government, you're going to cover a lot of ground. There's no one or two issues that you get to focus on. You've got to address everything that impacts people. You may have one or two issues you're interested in, but if you decide you want to be a part of the conversation in the larger actions of government, if you've got a problem with government, you want to be part of the solution, you're going to need to know a lot of things. You're going to learn a lot of things. So in this one, we're talking about timber counties. Now, for context, I live in Oregon. Oregon has 13 timber counties. At least that was what was acknowledged in a recent lawsuit. And those counties, according to a lawsuit filed in Linn County, Oregon, have been shorted about $1.1 billion over the course of an agreement with the state, where the state was supposed to manage forest land that's within certain counties and make optimal use of it. So in the course of doing that, the allegation of the lawsuit was that the state has not adequately performed these tasks, and over time, their inadequacy of performance has cost timber counties $1.1 billion. And there are aspects of that we can get into further, but right now we're talking about that $1.1 billion. This has gone through the Linn County Court. It went through the Oregon Court of Appeals based in Salem, which that Court of Appeals in a very long form said, no, we don't. So the decision of the state was, no, we don't owe $1.1 billion due to our mismanagement of a resource that we agreed to properly manage. And at this time, the Oregon Supreme Court has determined this isn't a case worth hearing. They're just not even going to talk about that amount of money that has been shorted to 13 counties. So what does that mean? What's the outcome of that? Well, obviously 13 counties have been underfunded for an extended period of time. The agreements were formed in the 30s and 40s, but I've heard reference to around the 90s is when this problem occurred. Around the 90s was also the same point where the state took greater control of how much forestry and how much harvesting of timber could be conducted in these counties, due to other reasons, ecological reasons, spotted owl, some other things. That shortage results in counties having to make harder decisions. So they're going to have to decide what they can pay for and what they can't. So in one case, we can look at Josephine County in Oregon. About 5 years ago, they had to cut down on their county patrols with their sheriff deputies. This results in about a 4-hour period daily where there's just no coverage in the counties. And this has resulted in some extreme person-to-person crimes that have taken place during that window of time that they're extreme. They're words we really don't want to say on YouTube. So what's the potential solutions other than cutting patrols? Well, you can increase how frequently you're doing your timber harvests, or you can expand how much you harvest at a given time. So in my county, in Coos County, we're on a 60-year cycle. So when timber gets cut, it's 60 years old. Gets you plenty of board feet. The timber has had more time to get large and absorb more CO2. But without funding, like our county right now, and this is 2023, looking at the next year's budget, is going to project it to run a $3 million deficit. So without citizens having to pay more in taxes with the knowledge that they've already been shorted money for the course of decades, that leaves two options. You can reduce patrols, like Josephine County did, or you can harvest timber in a less sustainable fashion. You can accelerate the rate at which you're selling timber, the amount you're selling at a given time. which would look like a decrease from 60-year timber to 45-year timber. So these decisions by the state to underfund these areas would result in a direct impact on the environment and on CO2 emissions and absorption. So when you hear a state talk about how they want to be more green, be better for the environment, this is not the way to do that, obviously. But if you can't pay your bills, you have to find something. And that would be the method by which it can be done, a method. So I'm running through this fairly quickly, high level. If you've got more questions on specific issues, ask them in the comments. But what we're looking at next is kind of what could be done on the state's part. Obviously, it could run this through the Supreme Court and see if it's something that's valid or not, but the state has chosen not to do so. Why is arguable, debatable. There's a potential when a county gets too low on funds or aspects aren't functioning well, the state has the ability to step in and take more direct control. So one thing that could be an outcome of this, if it were not addressed, would be that the state would exercise greater preemption of local authority. And in these counties where they don't see a lot of support already, they could essentially manufacture support or mandate compliance with their objectives. And what we're looking at with those timber counties is roughly 57% of the population of Oregon, or two of the counties in that list are the top two net income earners in the state. So if you were to take those out, it would represent more in the area of 33% of the state's population that would be affected. It takes us to this final bit. If 1.1 billion isn't going to be provided back in what's owed, what happens to it? Well, this year, 2023, the state is expecting, or has confirmed, a $5.6 billion surplus, 1.1 billion of that being owed to timber counties. And what it's expressed its intent to do with that money is to provide it back as a tax reimbursement, which is good for people. It'll make people happy. It'll make maybe all Oregonians happy, whereas 33% of Oregonians who are not in that top 1 and 2 earners are seeing $1.1 billion of their funds redistributed across the remaining 77% of Oregonians. So for the fewer of us, essentially the balance of state, this is taking away from our funds that we need to operate and redistributing it throughout the state to areas, citizens who their counties were funded appropriately. And that kind of takes us to where we're at. I mean, that's the end of the story right now. How to fix it? Well, advocate with the state to get the Supreme Court to look at the case of the $1.1 billion owed to 13 counties, or other steps. Those are things we could discuss at a later time. We probably will. But right now, that's the gist to know. State mismanagement of land resulted in a $1.1 billion deficit for 13 counties, or non-funding. And the outcomes could be lower public safety or lower absorption of CO2 emissions and a more detrimental effect to the environment, as has been expressed as an objective of the state. This would be cutting off their nose to spite their face. Suggest this topic. If you have additional things you want to talk about, go ahead and put it in the comments. We're building up our material and seeing where the interest is. And yeah, that's it for now. Appreciate you.